My name is Dale Schouten. I work for Intel. And thank you all for coming here today to hear me. I work with the XDK project a little bit. You might have seen it over the Intel booth. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, go check it out. But today, I'm here to talk about Node-Webkit, which is a cool new tool that allows you to convert your web apps into desktop apps. I'll talk a little bit more about that. In preparing for this, I looked at some presentation tips online, and one of the tips I found is, don't talk about yourself because your audience doesn't care about you. I'm sure they meant that in the nicest way, but being something of a contrarian, I decided to start off with a slide all about me. I am an old C programmer. Actually, I'm not talking about myself just to talk about myself because it's relevant to the story. I'm an old C programmer. Do we have any C programmers in the house today? All right, how many of you were programming in C 10 years ago? 20 years ago? 30? All right, that's about my range. I've been programming C for probably about 30 years. So, I have to say, I almost feel like a fraud coming here speaking at a HTML5 conference, because for most of my career, I've been a C programmer, a compiler guy. I only really started to get into JavaScript and HTML the last 2 or 3 years. About 2 or 3 years ago, I kind of drank the HTML5 Kool-Aid and started looking for opportunities to learn more about the technology, and it's pretty exciting. I've always liked learning new things. Throughout my career, there's a lot of fun stuff to learn all the time. But when I do learn new things, it's fun to read about them, but to really understand them, I like to learn by doing. So I started to look for opportunities where I could do stuff in HTML and JavaScript and CSS. Now, being an old C programmer, of course, when I started off with JavaScript, I was tempted to write this as my first line of code so I could type printf like I was used to. Then somebody told me about console, so I added that. I didn't really do that, but it was tempting at times. But so I'm looking for places I can use it. One of the things I did would, instead of using Word documents, I'd start using HTML5 documents. Instead of using Excel to generate graphs, I started doing stuff with JavaScript. But I didn't have any good interactive projects. So about a year ago, when my daughter was in 8th grade, sort of the pinnacle of her middle school career, and she had the cool science teacher. He was one of these guys who would give cool demos and do a video of the day and do lots of fun stuff, and he would have a science question of the day. So anybody know where those semicircular canals are located? Yeah, in the ear. That's my guess too. Let's see if we're right. Yes, in the ears. So this science teacher, he presumably used to write these questions up on the whiteboard, and then he'd write the answers. He had a long list of questions that he would use. And he sent out mail to a bunch of us geek parents and said, he'd really like a computer app to do this for him. In particular, he wanted something that would randomly pick a question from his list and would not ask the same question throughout the school year. He didn't want any duplicates in the school year. And he wanted to be able to add questions as he came up with more new questions. So I got that email on a Sunday night, and I thought, oh, this is cool. I can use HTML and JavaScript for this. Perfect. So I whipped up this. This is actually an iframe of my little app, prototype app that I sent to him. He said, oh, that looks great. Now, the problem is, I'm not a web server, a server client kind of guy. Most of my work has been in what you would call front end, although to me front end meant parsing and back end meant code generation. But the stuff that I've done with HTML and JavaScript and CSS is all front end stuff. So I didn't really want to set up a local server and do that stuff. But in order to satisfy his requirements, it was a little tricky. So he had some requirements and I had some requirements. Part of my requirements were that I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this. It's just a little volunteer project. So it needed to be easy to use, a simple GUI. HTML is great for that. That's perfect. I needed to make it easy for him to add questions. He was comfortable editing a text file, editing an Excel file, and that's cool. Now, if I were writing a shell script, that'd be a piece of cake. He didn't want any duplicates. Again, so throughout the year, it would have to remember which questions had been asked and not ask them again. And I didn't want to worry about whether he was running this on Windows or Mac, so I wanted to make it easily cross-platform. So Bash scripts were out. And I wanted something that I could just send him in the mail, not have to go set anything up for him on his computer. Something I just send him, he would install it and it would work. And portable, so in case portable is separate from cross-platform in this case, so that if he had to change computers halfway through the year, everything would work. So looking at HTML, it's perfect. It's easy to use. Easy to add questions. Well, yeah, I mean, I took his list of questions, fiddled around in VI, and generated a JSON object. I wasn't real comfortable with letting him go in and edit the JSON object, because if he broke something while editing questions, that wouldn't be good. Again, I didn't want to have to go in and fix anything. No duplicates. Well, it could use local storage, but that would assume that he's running in the same machine throughout the year, and so that wasn't a great. Cross-platform, that's great because it runs on everything. Packaged, well, yeah, I mean, if I could make it a simple HTML file, that would be fine. And portable, again, with the no duplicates thing, that was a little tricky. So HTML was great for some things, but tricky for other things. Now, if I were doing a desktop app, it's kind of the opposite situation. If I wanted to whip something up quickly, it probably wouldn't have a nice GUI. Again, I could do a simple console-based app. That would be really easy for me, but hard for him. And, I'd have to have, it wouldn't exactly be cross-platform. On the other hand, all I need to do is edit a text file. I can read and write a text file to keep track of duplicates and to let him add stuff. And, the package and portable is kind of in between. So I had these two great technologies, but I needed a little bit for each one of them. I needed the good stuff in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which I knew how to do. I knew how to make it pretty and easy. Well, designers might argue about how pretty it was, but and then I had, the local files and APIs were great on desktop, but I didn't have a way of getting both at the same time. This is the space where Node-Webkit lives. And I wrote down intersection here. It's really more of a union because it does a little bit of both. Node-Webkit allows a combination of these web technologies and the APIs and access that you have on the desktop. To understand what Node-Webkit is, it's important to understand what the two different pieces of Node-Webkit are. I assume most of you are familiar with Node.js. You guys programmed in Node.js? Okay, so when I first heard about Node.js, it was touted as JavaScript for the server, as something that would allow you to use the same tools that you're using on the client side and the server side, the same JavaScript language. And in a nice way, it's also the asynchronicity of it that's built into Node.js plays well with that too, because it's very similar to the kind of asynchronicity event-driven model that you have in the browser. The JavaScript runs, the Node.js runs an event loop. You essentially put events out there that get run by the event loop. So coming from a parallel background, it took me a little time to understand the difference. I was used to thinking in terms of parallel multi-threaded code. This is really single-threaded but asynchronous code. So that's a nice feature. Again, very good parallel with the browser. And it gives you access to the network and the local files and things like that. So you can build a nice web server or any number of server-side applications. And it has, like a lot of successful languages, a great community of developers and a wonderful ecosystem of modules. There are hundreds and hundreds. I've actually, I think that I forget how many thousands of modules that are available through NPM now. So there's a ton of good stuff from Node. Now WebKit, when I say WebKit, it's really a little bit of a misnomer. WebKit is sort of technically the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript engine that originally for Safari, and Safari got it from the open source world. it's not really Blink either, in the same way that Blink is really the WebKit. What it really is Chromium. The difference being that Chromium is the browser that's built on WebKit, now Blink. So when I say Node-Webkit, it's really a combination of Node.js and Chromium browser. And now, being the browser, it gives you all those wonderful advantages you've got from the browser world. You've got libraries like jQuery, D3, 3JS. You've got frameworks like CSS frameworks like Bootstrap and Topcode. All this great technology that's been developed for the web for GUI interfaces. Node-Webkit is sort of the combination of these two things. And what holds them together more than anything is the V8 engine. V8 is the JavaScript engine developed by Google originally for Chrome and Chromium. And that was also the start of Node.js. When Ryan Dahl started Node.js, he grabbed the V8 engine and put the Node.js shell around it. So the way it works is that when you're running Node-Webkit, you're running a single V8 engine. You've got one thread, one event loop that's shared by both the Node.js code and the WebKit code. So it's all mixed together there, which is really convenient. One of the most interesting things about Node-Webkit, and one of the things that attracted me to it, is how easy it is to package something up for the desktop. And I'll get into more technical. I'm going to do a little overview first, and then we'll get into some more technical details on this. But essentially, when you go to the GitHub page for Node-Webkit, you've got some, among the possibilities, there are some pre-built binaries for Mac, Windows, and Linux. And you can take one of those pre-built Node-Webkit binaries, and then you combine that with your CSS code and HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code and all the other resources that you have for your web page. You add a simple package.json file, and you zip all those things up, and you combine it with that Node-Webkit executable to make a single package. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Your package.json is similar to sort of package.json you have when you're doing a Node.js module. Well, it's compatible, I guess you'd say. It's not exactly similar because you have some other things in there that don't apply to Node.js, but it's along the same idea. The two required bits of your Node.js are these first two lines here. So you need a name and you need an indicator of what your main HTML file is. Now, in this example, I have some other things as well that provide some extra details you don't necessarily need, but are handy to have. You can turn the toolbar on and off. It's the URL bar. Make it resizable, full screen, things like that. In addition, you've got dependencies here, like for NPM dependencies. And you can even add this JS flags, and there's a similar Chrome flags option, which will allow you to pass specific options to the V8 engine. I don't know if any of you have tried using the V8 engine on its own. Have you ever run V8 separately? So if you have, you might notice that there's a few extra options that you can try in there. You can actually pass those options in here, in this case, to take advantage of some of the new ES Harmony options within V8. Among the things that you want to package up would be your HTML and CSS files, but also if you're using Node, you may have dependencies on some various modules. So you'd use npm just as you would if you were building a Node module. Do an npm install, and it'll install stuff based on what's in your package.json. It'll create a Node modules directory in your main root directory there, and you zip it all together with everything else. Now, what it actually looks like when you do it is, it was surprisingly odd and simple to me when I first saw it. But for a Windows executable, you actually just cat it on to the end of the executable. It seems a bit odd at first, but it works surprisingly well. For Apple, with the Mac, it's a little bit more organized. I guess they have these nice app bundles on the Mac, which allow you to store a lot of extra information about the resources and shared libraries within the app bundle. So for that, you copy this zipped file. Now, this app.nw file is the actual zip file. It's just renamed to a .nw. And when you open up the, like on the Mac, when you open up the application, it'll look for that compressed file within your app bundle. So on Linux, it's similar to Windows, where you just cat the executable, cat onto the end of the executable to make a new executable for yourself. Because it's essentially running in Chromium, you've got all pretty much all of the possibilities that you have when you're running Chromium. So for example, if you want to debug your code, you press the little gearbox, and up pops Chrome Developer Tools. So all that technology that you're familiar with from using Chrome, it's available through Node-Webkit as well. A few warts. When you do your packaging for Windows and Linux, you do need to include a couple of extra files. So in my case, if I had been doing this for the science teacher, I would have given him a folder with those files in them and told him just run it from that folder. So there's a couple of DLLs and resources file that you need. On Apple, it's particularly nice, again, because the app bundle encapsulates all that for you. You don't need to pass anything but the single app. It is fairly mature. When I started working on this, or working with Node-Webkit 6 months ago, it was about 0.4 something. The most recent version, I think, is 0.7.5. It's really come a long ways in the past 6 months. There are several people at Intel working on it now. But there are a few things that are still broken. They have excellent information on GitHub, in terms of the bugs and the wiki there. But there's a few things that are still broken, don't quite work. There's a few issues with name conflicts occasionally, where you have modules that are built into Chrome and into Node that conflict with each other. Sometimes the context that you're dealing with, while everything's in one thread, there's different contexts that you're dealing with, the globals and windows and such, that can be a little confusing. And currently there's don't have many of the keyboard shortcuts that you're used to with Chrome. I wanted to briefly mention that of course, this isn't the only project that is using an idea like this. One of the more mature ones is the Chrome Embedded Framework. I don't know a lot about it. I haven't used it myself, but my understanding is it's a little more designed for embedding a Chrome browser within your normal C and C++ app. But it's definitely not as easy to use as Node-Webkit. But this is the framework that the brackets editor from Adobe is using for their technology, where they're doing, again, the brackets editor is all written using web technology, but it's packaged as part of a CEF package. And a nice extension of that is there's a project called the brackets shell, which is a little closer to the capabilities of Node-Webkit in that it's easier to get started and get up and running by just modifying an index.html. There's app.js. I wasn't able to get that working quickly, and there's a few others. There's a great article here by Clinton Berry, if you want to read more about that. Okay, so the next question is, what can you do with it? Okay, well, one of the things I wanted to point out, in case it wasn't obvious, you guys familiar with reveal.js? If you're not, you've probably seen it several times at this conference. I've seen quite a few presentations that appear to be reveal.js. It's a really nice framework for doing slide presentations. And I started using it about a year ago. When I was preparing this presentation, somebody challenged me, hey, why not try it in Node-Webkit? So sure enough, this presentation is actually a Node-Webkit app. In fact, you can see the desktop here. I'm just running, let's see. this app here, I think. A little hard to see on the screen. So this is actually just an instance of this app running in Node-Webkit. In order to do this, it was not a lot of work. I was expecting that it might be, because there's extra stuff in Reveal. What I did is I essentially dropped my folder onto Node-Webkit, and it worked. Well, with the one addition that I had to do create a package.json file, and it just worked. So essentially, anything that's any sort of normal single-page web app that I've tried works pretty easily. In fact, let me give an example of that here. I've got a simple thing that I did a while back, just when I was playing around with JavaScript, and I wanted to see if I could make a game, and this works fine. This is running in Firefox. It's a piece of cake, and this is sort of the epitome of a single-page web app. It's a single file, single page. There's no server stuff going on to worry about. It's just, it plays real easy. So let me remove this package.json so I can start from scratch. And I can show you what's involved in making a package.json. So it's a simple object. The two required fields are the name, which we'll just call flood, and then it needs to know where the main HTML file is. And again, being contrarian, I tend not to name my main files index.html. It just seems too obvious. Okay, if all goes well, now I should be able to, oops, here we go. Go up here. Now here I've got a Node-Webkit app. This is just what I downloaded off of GitHub. And I've got my file, my folder containing the package.json and all of my stuff here. I pop that up, and it works. Again, I can play the game. I can resize to be a little bigger, but it's not ideal having to resize it. So I think what I will do is modify the package.json. And we can add a window field. Oops, that's not a brace. There we go. And just simply specify the width and height of, let's see, of the opening window. If I can spell height correctly. Okay, so now that I've done that, I just drop this on here again. I do that a lot. Forget those commas. When I redesign the replacement for package.json, we're gonna avoid commas. There we go. Now it's a better size, and it still works. And again, I can package this up. I can send it to somebody. One of the issues I had when I started using Reveal.js internally at Intel is that I do a presentation, and people are used to sending around PowerPoint slides, and I had this HTML bundle to send around. But that wasn't so bad, but I always had to make sure whoever was going to look at the presentation, please use Firefox or Chrome, because IE8 won't cut it for the stuff I did in Reveal. And actually, I'm not saying that an app would be the best replacement for a presentation data, but if I had this, I'd probably pass around a Node-Webkit bundle for Windows, and then I would at least be sure that they could open it up without having to do anything extra. I wouldn't have to try to convince them to install Chrome on their machine. But that gives you an idea of how easy it is to create the package. Let's look at some of the other things that we can do. here and go back and, oh, so I added this little menu. This is actually, now when you get Node-Webkit, it comes with several menus. It has the standard menu, the edit menu, and the window menu. I added this custom. I'll talk a little bit more about how to do that, because I wanted to be able to do stuff like that on my own. So, of course, the thing that motivates this for me, and I've thought about this several times when I've looked at doing web technology apps for things where I just want to read and write a file. I don't see why I need to have a web server up and running just to do that. Every time I start a web server, it gives me a security warning. It makes me very nervous. So with Node-Webkit, I can easily read and write files. So for example here, I can pop up the debugger. I can say fs equals require fs, just like a good Node program. And I can say fs.reader. Now I know a real Node programmer would not use sync, but for the purposes of the demo, I'll use the synchronous I/O, which I'm grateful to have for times like this. And there's a listing of what's in my /temp directory. So I could write a file explorer in HTML with this. In addition to reading and writing files, there's a clever technique to bring up the file chooser, because you don't want to have to rewrite your file chooser if your system has one. So what you do is you can put in an input element that has a type file input, and then you can click that programmatically here. So I'll show you how that works. I go back into the debugger, and let's see if I got all this right. Oh, what did I do wrong? Yeah, I see. I didn't grab everything here. Oops. There we go. And there's our file chooser. And I can click a file, and I think I've got an alert that'll, yep. And there's the alert to prove that I actually found the right file name. Now, the cool thing about this is that, this concept is available in the browser, but for security reasons, there's certain things you can't do in the browser. And one of the things you can't do is programmatically trigger an event on this kind of input element, because they don't want some random web page to be able to open files in your system. Because this is a desktop environment, a lot of those security features are disabled. So it allows us to do things like this. So even without fundamentally changing things in Node-Webkit, you have a lot of possibilities just by turning off some of those requirements. Things like the full screen. Here, if I go out of full screen mode again, when I go into full screen mode, yeah, I can do that in the browser, but it's going to ask me, is this okay, and so on. You don't have to worry about that with Node-Webkit. Another thing that I actually found really useful is using the Node OS module. Now, a little background. I'd love to think of myself as a maker, but I don't make as much as I wish I did, except in software. And I used to rent a room in a house when I was in grad school, and the landlord there, he was a very resourceful kind of guy. He was a geek, but not in a technical way, but in a lot of other ways. And I was walking by one day, and he was building a balcony along the side of his house. And I said, hey, how's it going? And asked him what he's doing, and said, well, because I knew he had a balcony on the other side of his house, on the east side of his house, and he was building one on the west side. So I asked him, what he's doing, and he says, well, I love to read my paper in the morning. I like to sit out on the balcony and read paper over breakfast. But the sun's really bright. So his solution was to build a balcony on the other side of the house. Now, I just love that mentality. In my case, this is an older laptop, and I have a tendency to run out of memory. I run Firefox. I open up a lot of windows. I close some of them. But over a couple weeks, the memory really adds up. So I could get more memory, but instead of that, I designed this little visual aid for myself. And this is a Node-Webkit program. And what it does, you can't tell real well because I'm not doing much at the moment, but let me just pop up something here. So, oh, there goes the CPU. So, oh, I'm not connected to the network right now. I turned that off. But so this gives me, this circle here gives me the CPU. The inner circle is the system time, and the outer circle is the user time. And this circle over here tells me how much free memory I've got. So I've used D3 to visualize this information. It's a very simple D3 program. And one of the things it does is this green circle here, as I get more and more memory, it turns to orange and then to red. So when I get to see a big red circle, I know I got to close Firefox and restart it. So, you know, I just love this program. You know, it was one of those things, again, it was easy to do this visualization using web technology, but it was impossible to get the information I needed using the browser. Having Node-Webkit allowed me to combine the two, so I can read information about my CPU and take advantage of the best of both worlds here. Let me quit out of that. Let's get back to full screen. Okay, so that's CPU. You can see how many CPUs you have. You can read all sorts of information about your environment. Menus, I showed you earlier that Node-Webkit allows you facilities to create system menus so it looks just like a regular app. In fact, I'm not demoing it today, but there's also ways that you can change the name in the menu bar so it represents your app and add custom icons and everything. That's all supported so that when you're done, it looks just like a custom desktop app. This gives you a little sense of how to create menus. There's this one special module that's not doesn't come from either Node.js or from Chromium. That's this nw.gui module, and that's where a lot of this sort of in-between stuff lives. And in addition to menus, you can do stuff in your system tray. You know, again, if we look at the system tray for this guy, one of the other features of this, I had this set up to be an always-on-top window, another thing that Node-Webkit buys you, so that it was always there. I could see it. It wouldn't get obscured. But sometimes it was a real pain because it would cover stuff up. I'd go somewhere and you know, be looking at some other app, and this would be obfuscating it. So I added a menu. So now I can change always on top. So now it's not always on top. Now I can change it. So it's nice to be able to put stuff in the system tray. I think it's also, at least on the Mac, possible to do little, change the icon in the system tray so you can act as alerts and so on. There's a kiosk mode. I'm not going to demonstrate that today because I had a little bit of funky behavior when I'm combining full screen and kiosk mode. But essentially, this will disable your ability to quit out of the program, at least with the mouse. So you can put up a screen with a mouse, and then you're kind of locked into this app. You can't change between apps and things. It's handy for demo situations and such. There's also the concept of a GUI shell. You know, as an old guy, when I think shell, I'm thinking bash or corn shell and things like that. This is referring more to the GUI shell, like the Finder or the I forget what they call it in Windows File Explorer, where it will invoke programs according to what their standard thing is. So you can say, you can open a link in a browser by saying open external. You can open it with whatever its default application is by doing open item, or you can even open up a folder. So I can demonstrate that here. So we got, bring up the debugger. Yeah, here it is. Let me just quickly here get out. It's a little easier to do this out of full screen mode. So in here I can say, let me make sure I've got GUI here. Oh, okay. Then I say GUI.shell open item, and I've got something in my home. So I open up this item, it pops up in the standard preview. This is, in case you're not familiar with it, that's Arduino Uno up in the upper left, and a Raspberry Pi, and then in the middle on the bottom is Intel Galileo. It's our new Arduino compatible board. And you can, bring up, let's see, show item and folder. Sorry, my eyes are not what they used to be. And there you can bring up the Finder and so on. So lots of desktop kind of things that you can do in this JavaScript environment. What I found really cool, and again, I don't have a demo of this, but I did play around with it a little bit, is you can use the Node.js facility, which is a way of combining native code with Node.js. There's a slightly special version for Node-Webkit called Node-Webkit. Same idea, it uses the necessary header files and stuff for building. This allows you to write stuff in actual C or C++, and then incorporate that as a Node module. Essentially, you build a Node module that has native code in it, and then include that native code. So, so it's a nice way to do true native code inside your Node-Webkit app. Another thing that's kind of interesting, if you're familiar with V8, anybody ever heard of V8 Snapshot? So, okay, so V8 has this technology that allows it to optimize the creation of a new context. When you start up V8, it has all these standard objects that are part of the root context. It takes time to build those, and a lot of that is written in JavaScript itself. So it's kind of like a bootstrapping thing. So V8 came up with this clever idea of using a pre-compiled version of it, sort of. So it kind of does a pre-compilation of this JavaScript code. So you've already got that context there, and then it caches that. So whenever you bring up a new V8, it's got the information already cached. It's a cool technology designed to help startup time for V8 code, or for JavaScript code. It has an interesting side effect that all that JavaScript code that was used to create that initial context snapshot, you don't need to ship that anymore because you've got this sort of precompiled JavaScript. So for Node-Webkit, it offers this possibility of using that same technology and creating a snapshot of your JavaScript code. So one of what some people see as a disadvantage sometimes to web technologies is that you essentially have to ship your source. You can obfuscate your JavaScript, but essentially you're shipping source. If you don't want to do that with Node-Webkit, you can actually refrain from shipping at least some of your source. This is somewhat limited because of the V8 issues. I think it's limited on the size that it can incorporate of your JavaScript. One thing I saw said it was a few jQueries worth of JavaScript code that you can include in this. And it does somewhat affect performance in a negative way because it's using the less sophisticated compiler to build that snapshot. But if you really don't want to ship your source code and you've got JS code you don't want to ship, this is one way that you can take a snapshot of it and ship essentially compiled code. Oh yeah, one last thing just to demonstrate here. I can demonstrate with this guy if I bring up the debugger here. You can also do stupid tricks with Windows here. Again, you say gets require And there's a special kind of window that you can get from the GUI, the NW GUI. This is an identifier for the current window, essentially. And then you can do things like move by 100. So you can move, you can position your window, you can resize. Let's see. Make it a lot bigger, and so on. So you can do all these sorts of things that you might want to do with Windows. You can pop up new windows. You can pop up windowless windows and essentially create your own notification system. Lots of interesting possibilities you can play with Windows. There's a variety of different ways that you can create persistence in your app. You can use local storage, but you can also use local files. You can use local databases. There's lots of things. You can create frameless windows. You can programmatically grab stuff, put stuff to and from the system clipboard. You can have an app with your own icons. It also supports WebGL. If you want to see an example of a real app that's built in Node-Webkit, Intel XDK is actually built on Node-Webkit technology. So when you start up this app, you know, it's a sophisticated, fairly complex app, but it's all built in Node-Webkit. We're incorporating the brackets editor, the REPL emulator, a bunch of other code that we've written, and it's just a Node-Webkit app. In sum, the most important thing to me about Node-Webkit, it's really, really easy. So if you have any interest at all, go to their GitHub page, try it out, drop your HTML on there and try it out. It's flexible, it's powerful, it allows you to leverage all this great stuff from Node.js and the web world. That's just saying I don't own anything. So there's the link there. Give it a try if you have any interest. Are there any questions I can answer? Yes, sir. How big is the executable? It's around, I want to say around 50 megabytes, something like that. So typically, of course, when you create your zip file, it just pales in comparison to the Node-Webkit app. So the bulk of what you're shipping is the Node executable. Yeah?
Is this something you can distribute the executable in like either the Windows Store or the App Store?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I don't know for sure. At least this current version is focused specifically on the desktop, so it wouldn't make sense in mobile context. But for the desktop apps, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't. I don't know what the requirements are for those stores, but if they take an executable, you know, or some installable package, I don't see why not. Yes, sir.
Have you done any tests on mobile?
You know, we're pursuing a different strategy with mobile. If you go to the Intel booth and look at the presentation on Crosswalk, that's, you know, a similar idea using the Blink engine and adding native APIs as plug-in there, and that's more what we're looking at with the mobile space. Yes?
Have you run a lot of native code that's compiled into Node with this?
I haven't. I started playing with it when I saw that capability, but it should be fairly straightforward depending on what you're doing. Yeah. Anything if it works with Node.js, that is. So. Yeah. I should be able to. I mean, if you can do it in Node, it shouldn't be a problem. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it possible to integrate a browser plugin in the WebKit?
Well, you can use it just like a browser. Do you mean?
For example, you have some browser plugin and you want to.
Oh yes.
Embed that in the website?
I think so. Yeah, I remember reading about that. I think it does have support for standard browser plugins. Roughly speaking, if it works okay in Chrome, I'm guessing it'll probably work okay, but very roughly. Yeah.
Can you access local port?
Local network stuff? Again, if you can access it in Node, yeah, it shouldn't be a problem.
How about USB?
Oh, USB? Offhand, I haven't checked that personally, but I don't see any problem with that. I would expect you to be able to. Yeah?
Can you explain a little bit about the terminals? I mean, how exactly like the JavaScript from the HTML,
Uh-huh.
like the Node,
Right.
like talks together? I mean, for example, I change one web page.
Essentially,
I mean, it's like all my JavaScript gets wide, all the information. Or
essentially, it's different contexts for different windows, but the same thread running things. So you can access it by passing this context. Like with Node.js, your context is in the globals object, and with a web page, it's in the Windows object. When you open up a new window, it creates a new Windows object. So that's what I said about the warts. It gets a little bit confusing. That's why I didn't want to get into it too much here. But for the most part, once you grab the right context, like if I open up a new window and I get that Windows context is returned, I can go off that window, say that window.document.whatever, and access that Windows context. And the Node.js context through the globals context.
So you have two contexts, and the Node.js context is the same.
Yeah, it's all in the same process and everything. It's just that the context is slightly different.
And everything is driven by the whatever script you include on your HTML.
Yeah, basically, it's fundamentally it's driven by the event loop, but it's the same event loop for both the Node context and the HTML. So, all right, yeah.
Does it support multiple tabs, and maybe if there's something to talk between tabs?
You mean tabbed browsing? That's an excellent question. I haven't tried that. I'm embarrassed to say I don't use tabs myself, so it never occurred to me to try it, but I expect it should, but I haven't tried that myself. It should be similar to multiple windows, which I have played with. Yeah?
What web workers? Does it support web?
As far as I know, it should, but again, I haven't tried that yet myself, but I don't see any fundamental problem with that. Yeah. Yeah?
Do you make HTTP requests?
Okay, so now you're getting into that territory where I get a little uncomfortable. Yeah, so the question was about HTTP requests. Yes, that's the short answer. I'm a little fuzzy on the details. But again, you can set up server. You can actually even access your local files through a special URL that's built into. So if you want to access your files rather than using the Node.js path, there's a special built-in URL. I forget what it is offhand. You can send it as looking like an HTTP request if that's easier for you when referencing your local files. But you can set up a server. You can do all that kind of stuff in there. So yes, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Comes from being an old C guy. Oh yeah, over there.
If you set up a server, so I can, for instance, package up something like a database, send it to somebody else, and they can get it. And then
I believe so. He was asking if you package up something as a database and set it up as a server. I believe so. Again, if you can do it in Node, it should be pretty straightforward. Yeah.
and it'll go to all the like the 884 and something like that.
Yeah, it depends on how you do it, but yeah, that's something like that. I know that within our XDK app, you can see some examples of that kind of thing, where they reference things through sort of an internal server. Was there one over here? Okay, is that all the questions? All right, thank you very much. If you liked it, let me know. You can tweet me at Old Geeks Guide on Twitter, and thank you very much.